In this video, I'll discuss using beads in knitting and give a general overview of the different types of ways to use beads in knitting. There are several terms out there that can be used interchangeably, but shouldn't necessarily be used interchangeably because they technically mean different things. There's bead knitting, there's beaded knitting, and there's purse knitting. And these are three different terms that refer to some different methods of using beads in your knitting. Some sources on the internet actually define these terms incorrectly, so this can add to the confusion. As long as you dig a little deeper to actually understand which method the term is referring to, then it doesn't really matter which term is being used. There are two main types of ways to use beads, either pre-strung onto your yarn or thread or applied bead by bead. With the pre-strung beaded method, the bead can sit in three different locations on the yarn or on a stitch. It can be on a leg of a stitch. It can be in between two stitches, so in the running thread between two stitches, or it can sit on top of the head of a stitch. Two of the terms that can get confused really easily are bead knitting and beaded knitting. With bead knitting, this is painting a picture with beads in the knitted fabric. So the beads are pre-strung, and they are pre-strung in multiple colors in a determined sequence in order to make a picture, a mosaic picture on the knitting. You bring up the beads one at a time in every single stitch. Every single stitch gets a bead on both right side and wrong side rows. All of the beads are oriented on the right side of the fabric. You see none of the knitted fabric underneath the beads. The knitted fabric is just a framework to hold the beads steady, and the beads are what shows on the right side of the work. Typically, this is used to make very small items because it is very labor intensive and the items are very heavy. Bead knitting is sometimes also referred to as purse knitting because this technique was traditionally used to make small purses, and so it can also be known as purse knitting. With this technique, the beads sit inside a stitch, so on one leg of a stitch. So the whole is oriented vertically, and usually a twisted stitch is used to make sure that that bead is pushed to the front and the other leg of the stitch falls to the rear of the work and is not visible. By contrast, beaded knitting also uses pre-strung beads, but in all one color. These beads are typically positioned on the running thread in between two stitches. This orients the bead hole horizontally on the fabric. The beads are either an accent or they are featured as the main feature of the fabric. When placing beads in between stitches, you can place any number of beads. There's a subset of this type of beaded knitting. In Principles of Knitting, June Hemmons Hyatt calls it swag beading. So multiple beads are strung in between the stitches and create a swag look. And this was typically used to make purses. I have some purse examples here that show swag beading. The base fabric is garter stitch and it's worked flat, and the beads are swagged on both right side and wrong side rows in order to maintain the distance between the columns of stitches. So this is very heavy because it uses a lot of beads, and it typically needs to be lined because the bead swags create holes where things could poke through. So shaping is created by increasing the number of beads in the swags to make the fabric grow in width. This small amulet purse can really show the swag effect. On the right side, longer swags of beads were placed, and on the wrong side, the columns of swag beads were maintained to maintain the width of the fabric while allowing the beads in the front to hang in larger loops. Another way to use pre-strung beads is to use slip stitch beading, where you slip the stitch with the yarn held in front and slide a bead, one or more beads up to sit on that horizontal thread resting in front of the slipped stitch. So those are all methods where the beads are pre-strung, but you can apply beads without pre-stringing them. This is called the hook method, and you use either a very fine beading crochet hook or a bead needle or a split eye thin metal needle to apply a bead to a single stitch. As you are working, you grab the live stitch where you want to apply a bead and use the crochet hook to slip it off the needle, and then slide a bead onto the two legs of the whole entire stitch, and then slip the stitch back and work it. This situates the bead up and down with the hole oriented vertically, and it is anchored on the two legs of the stitch. The beads using this method are accents. You can only really slip one bead onto a stitch, and the beads are more of an accent piece, but you do not need to pre-string your beads. So that's really just an overview of the several different ways that you can add beads to knitting, pre-stringing them or applying them as you go. Have you used one or more of these methods? Let me know in the comments below. I hope this was helpful. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and thank you so much for watching.